Welcome to Bethany. Today we are celebrating the last Sunday of this liturgical year with a feast of Jesus Christ, the King of the universe. So obviously all three readings will be focusing on Jesus Christ, having this rather special title, and in all readings throughout all 3 years, the King means something completely different as compared to what we normally associated with kingdom and kingship, at least in this world. So let's look into those readings so that we could find something for ourselves to feed our spirits and become better disciples of Jesus Christ. The first reading is coming to us from the second book of Samuel. This is quite an interesting book. It was written originally as one book, later on got divided into the first and second, kind of similar thing as you can find in the New Testament with the Gospel of Luke and Acts of the Apostles. It was only divided because the scroll would be way too big. So for the practical and logistical reasons, it is actually in two pieces, but it's one continuing story. So the book was written approximately between 931, of course, before Jesus, and 586, which means before the Babylonian exile. We do not know who has written this book. Traditionally, the authorship has been ascribed to Samuel, Nathan, and Gad. But we now know that they did not read the book. And even the book itself, or the books, is not a chronological continuation that would go in some kind of a linear way. It is rather a combination of different stories which focus on the idea how God was leading his people in Israel, and especially how he was leading them through the help of what we would call prophets. So today's reading, which comes from the 5th chapter of Samuel, is focusing on David, who finally is uniting all 12 tribes of Israel, 10 tribes of the north, 2 tribes of the south. And he is presenting himself as a king, which of course he will be anointed as such. But the interesting thing is, because the pattern that we find in today's first reading is focusing on the idea of introducing peace through strength. In other words, I'm so strong that either I'm going to show it to you by defeating you or defeating other tribes or nations, or I'm going to manifest myself as so strong that you wouldn't even think or dare of jeopardizing your life, trying to, I don't know, conquer me or take something from me. So peace through strength. Very Old Testamental idea that is being presented in today's first reading. Just one thing about this book, even in this very short passage, we know that there were at least 3 different editors that were working on it. Well, of course, we do not know the original version of that, so what we are left with is those versions that we have up to this day. So what can we ascertain from that, and how can we translate that first reading onto our lives so that we could get something for ourselves? Obviously, it is focusing on the idea of kingship and what it means to be a leader, but also what it means to handle power. And even those 3 descriptions, or the 3 words, can be quite thought-provoking. Right? What does it mean to be a leader? Even does God call me to be a leader? If I am a leader, How do I see myself as a leader? Or how do I handle power? Maybe I'm abusing it, or maybe I am using my power in the wrong way. But I think the more common questions that we all can ask ourselves, because some of you may not be in the position of being a leader, having some kind of authority or power, maybe except for your own household. So the overarching questions or the larger questions might be such as this: what does it mean for me to serve others? What is service? What should be service in my life? Through any kind of engagement that I do have that is towards others, whether it is even within my bounds of the family, or through the work that I do, or maybe my involvement, engagement in the community, larger community, church community, other communities that I might be a part of. And I'm asking the question with an emphasis on the idea, what do I do, or how do I serve concretely? It's not just as an idea as such, but what would be the concrete examples of me serving others? But also, since I mentioned the word authority, what is my relationship with people that do have authority over me? Am I simply hating them or disliking them simply because they do have authority and I do not? How do I see them? Do I see them as people that are my competitors, or maybe even people that I'm allowed to hate or dislike or criticize, even if my criticism is wrong? Or maybe I have not engaged in a constructive criticism, or maybe I have not reached out to these people. If I have this opportunity to really maybe suggest something, because ultimately it is not only about them, it is also about my life, about lives of others, right? So me reaching out to those who have authority and suggesting something, in other words, helping them, it is also a form of service. Or maybe even a simpler question: do I pray for those in authority? Or I think that because it has nothing to do with faith, I am excluded, I am excused from even praying for those who exercise authority over me or over others. Am I praying for not only current leaders, but new leaders, especially in the faith community that you might be involved in? Or maybe I should do something in order to help create such leaders by me reaching out to the new generations, right? How do I put myself in the process of maybe these young people realizing that they do have certain skills? Maybe they are still unable to see them, and yet my involvement, my encouragement, and my support might be a key feature for them to become leaders of your community, but also maybe even the larger community. A friend of mine who is a webmaster, so I think for many different websites, he insists when people ask him what he's doing, he says, "I'm a web servant." Right? It's a very interesting way of even understanding what is my role. I am not a webmaster. I am a web servant. Kind of thought-provoking idea. And finally, something that in the Catholic Church might be a little bit untouched, or at least not very often spoken about, because if we slice our community, or every single community, right, every single church community, you will realize that there are certain groups, right, beginning with children, Then the next group would be youth and young adults, and then adults, and then finally that group that is not being spoken very often about, the group of elders. Some other Christian denominations, they do focus on elders quite a lot. Those elders even have certain powers and obligations, and they get really involved in decision-making process. But going back to our own faith tradition as Catholics, if you happen to be, well, depending on where you are in that outlook of the community, how do you think you should serve in your capacity? Beginning with kids and ending wherever you might be at, especially those of you who would, for all intents and purposes, consider themselves elders. What do you think your role is or should be? Are you aware of that? Would you be willing to play such role, not only in the sense of maybe becoming members of the pastoral council or financial council or some other body, but without even being formally involved in some kind of decision-making process? What should be your and everybody else's role as an elder of a church community? It's a very, very, very old type of position, if I may use that term. And yet, I think these days might be a little bit forgotten. What is the role of an elder in the Catholic Church, in the Catholic community? Now, moving to the second reading from letter Paul to Colossians. Very interesting situation here. Let's just first speak a little bit about the letter themselves. So Paul obviously did not write the letter. It was most likely written by one of his disciples. And it was directed to a community in Colossae. Colossae, it is a place which still exists, geographically exists in today's Turkey. It used to be so-called Asia Minor. It is approximately located 200 miles southeast from Izmir, that was known in the antiquities under the name of Smyrna. Izmir today is a vibrant city, the third largest city in Turkey. But going back to Colossae, just kind of last minute news, last month, yes, October of this very year, the archaeologists have discovered tombs that are dated some 2,200 years ago. Quite exciting situation there. So you may now ascertain that the city as such doesn't exist. That's true. There are remnants of that city. You can see that quite clearly. It's a beautiful area surrounded by mountains. Interestingly enough, there is a story about a dream in which one of the inhabitants of Laodicea, which was one of the other places where Paul was acting, was having a dream about Archangel Michael. And in that dream, Archangel Michael said that the solution to his daughter's health problems were waters of Colossae, and waters were and still are quite popular. They're very, very cold and fresh waters. They are supposedly having some healing qualities even these days, so people go there. There's like a pool, so you can walk in over there. I have no idea if it helps, but that's what they say. We don't know who they are, but they say that. So Colossae had two big earthquakes in the very first century, so that was really very destructive to the existence of the town, and eventually in the 12th century it was destroyed. Now, when it comes to spiritual issues, and that's why Paul's disciple, is writing this letter to Colossians, is that there was a very prevalent belief about the universe. They were focusing on the idea of angels, principalities, and powers. And sometimes it would go into a practice of some astral powers or even some occultic practices. So Paul is trying to kind of organize this whole situation and placing Jesus as the ultimate power, and thus the second reading for today's liturgy. But completely differently, as we just saw in the first reading from 2 Samuel, where the power was understood as a force, right? Or rather, peace was understood as a force. Now, Paul is here presenting Jesus, yes, having power, and yes, bringing peace, but not by force. At least not by force that we might be normally thinking about. So Paul sees that true peace can only be brought by reconciliation and not by some kind of warfare. True peace comes from the blood of Jesus on the cross, and subsequently, when it comes to ourselves, we can and should introduce peace by loving and not by hating or conquering others. So opposite to the first reading. Some questions that might help you to kind of put it in your own spiritual realm and think about it. So the first question, because we know God, right? We know God. We read His Word. We pray. But here's a big difference, and here's my first question. Do I believe in God, or do I believe God? What's the difference? One is just believe in God, that He exists, that He is, that He gave us His Son, and so on and so forth. But the second one is different. Do I believe God? Especially, do I believe Him when He says that I should conquer the world by love and forgiveness? That's a different story than just believing that God exists and this is who He is. But do I believe in what He said? In other words, do I take His word seriously, such as, for example, the 8 Beatitudes, which are so difficult for us to implement because they are so contra what we see around us. So thus the first question, do I believe in God, or do I believe God? Probably the right answer would be both. But what does it mean for me practically, right? Second one is kind of similar, or just comes naturally, because God is love. So do I believe in love? That love that means something, that is suffering, that is because of the other one, right? That takes me to the next one, when Jesus says to Pilate, my kingdom is not from here, but also you shall love your God and your neighbor as yourself. So do I practice that? And how do I practice that in some kind of a concrete way? That leads me to a question, am I willing to exercise radical love? Radical in a way that means that, am I willing to really go out of myself and really believe in God more than all the other structures, powers, connections, money, and all the other issues that might be important? And the last thing that I would like to bring to your attention as a form of a question, Do I believe that I am to save others, not just simply to make them convert or bring them simply to Jesus, but do I believe that I am to save others by loving them? That's probably the most obvious and the most clear version of what I would call radical love. And radical in the sense that it goes back to the roots. Radical means going back to the roots. And finally, the gospel, Luke's gospel. And again, Luke is showing the kingship of Jesus in a very dramatic way and a very opposed way to all the other forms of leadership and kingship. And the question that probably a reader of Luke's gospel might be asking him or herself is why Jesus, while hanging on a cross, while being ridiculed, is not really showing them the power, right? He could have. What if he really made this very bold statement, like, okay, you're jeering at me, you're laughing at me, why don't I save myself and others? I could do that. Why isn't he doing this? What is his motive? What is his reason for not doing that? Because probably the power that he is exercising is of a completely different nature than the one that people would have on their minds. And thus, a couple of questions that I would like to give you to consider as we are going through this Christ the King Sunday. Because we too are, in a sense, sometimes crucified, not physically but otherwise. So do I connect when I feel like I'm crucified? Do I connect with Jesus? Right? One of the criminals says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. Do I connect when I am being crucified? Or I'm complaining, I'm having all those different sorts of thoughts, but not necessarily connecting with Jesus. Or maybe am I looking for revenge or trying to dominate others? Right? Changing the subject, but again staying very much inside of today's gospel. Am I sometimes sneering at others or maybe gossiping about them or laughing at them? Or doing other things in order to diminish others? Why am I doing that? Is it coming from me not believing in my real dignity as a child of God? Or maybe I'm trying to kind of place myself as more powerful than God in me, and thus I feel intimidated when others are so more successful, more dominant, more explicit in the way they're being perceived by others. But also, do I respect, do I value and appreciate the efforts of others? Right? Because I may see others simply killing themselves for the sake of their brothers and sisters. Right? They do everything. Do I appreciate that? Do I see behind certain things that have been done the efforts of other people? Also, when I see some other people being really overworked or taking upon themselves so much, am I ready and willing to alleviate their load work, their involvement for the sake of others? And finally, a question that might be a little bit thought-provoking, because maybe sometimes we are turning to God with the same attitude as those people standing underneath those crosses, or even one of the criminals. And maybe we are complaining against God and saying something along those lines. Well, if you're God, why don't you come and do this? If you're God, if you're loving God, if you are really who you say that you are, why don't you... Do we say that sometimes? Do we, or at least, do we think that sometimes? So do we impose on God our own way and understanding of who God is? And who is He as our King? So dear friends, these are the few thoughts for this Sunday, last Sunday of this liturgical year. Next Sunday we will jump into the season of Advent. We will change also the year from C to A, different readings. In the meantime, of course, Thanksgiving. I wish you all very happy and very God-filled Thanksgiving time, because it's not only one day. Be grateful to God. Be grateful to your neighbor for everything that you received, that you are aware of, and those things that you might not even be aware of. And don't forget to come back here next Sunday to get a bunch of thoughts and inspiration right here at Bethany. God bless you all.